My sister and I live in a house together so we can split expenses, won't be alone, and it's safer. We both use a big chain pharmacy right down the road that every day seemed to have their robot call either her or me and leave a message our prescription was ready. Only to find out after getting into the car and driving over there they didn't have it, and when we'd say that they called us, they'd just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it just does that," like it was nothing. It was really a time waster and so frustrating to us. After COVID, lines were so long to get a shot or other things that it was nearly impossible to ever get what we were supposed to have, and oftentimes you'd only get half of your order having to return in a day or two. We were done with them, and saw on our neighborhood forum everyone was pissed with them too. We saw a recommendation of an independent local pharmacy nearby, and saw they even had free delivery. We were so sick of the ridiculous trips and wasting our gas, as well as their inefficiency, and we signed up with them, and we really loved the free prompt delivery. It was heavenly. We have a video doorbell that I review since a couple of creepers have come to our porch in the past to steal packages. So I just went through the video feed to see the pharmacy driver, a seemingly nice normal retired guy delivering meds for a little tip. I noticed in the video he seemed to be talking to someone, saying out to no one else on my empty porch my full first and last name, but slowly. Then he placed it where he normally does. Then I heard him talking every time he'd deliver on our doorbell, and he was really just always talking to himself, but he also always did something else. He always whistled this little distinct tune, but it wasn't really any known song. It was every time, and I'd flagged and saved the videos of him. So one night I decided to listen to a few of them, and I then realized just how creepy he really was. Fast forward to one night when my sister was in her bed asleep, and I was awake being the night owl that I am. It was 3 a.m. and I was wide awake. The house was 100% quiet. I was chilling in the living room at the front of the house. We have 2 windows that formed a corner right where I always sit. I was listening to some YouTube, and then I switched to some online shopping, then reading some news. I was totally concentrating on my phone when, out of the blue, this random whistling started right behind my head by those windows. And yep, you guessed it. It was the same very sound that the pharmacy delivery dude made all the time. I froze. I had on a light, but I remembered that we intentionally put thermal room darkening curtains in that room on the windows, so it always appeared dark, and you can't even see a shadow through them. I sure was glad that we did that. I continued to listen, and 3 times I heard this eerie damn tune. I realized at one window it faced one way so that you'd be approaching the house on the sidewalk, but this was right behind me. So it was at that other window that faced the street, but there are bushes there, and I heard that he was close right up on that window. Why was he so interested in me? I pondered about this, and I realized that I'd only spoken to the dude once when he first started delivering to us. After that night, I reviewed the doorbell videos of him, and it was a very definite, unique whistle tune, and almost like how little boys do when they're up to something. He never returned again after that, and hell no, I did not look out. Be safe, everyone. Deliveries can be creepy. The story happened to me a few weeks ago. I wasn't sure if it was good enough to share, though not as scary as some of the other stories. It's definitely weird in its own right. For some background, I'm a 26-year-old female. And this happened when I was in my boyfriend's car. He's a 24-year-old male. Now, my boyfriend's car isn't your average Nissan. It's the newest Nissan Z, which for those who don't know crap about cars, it's a very fast sports car. Definitely a head-turner type of car. It always attracts all kinds of car dudes. They're always either admiring it or telling him that they do raps and handing out their business cards. It's happened to us multiple times. My boyfriend's always nice about it, but usually throws that card out right after. Keep this in mind for the whole rest of the story. This also happened in an area where there isn't really much crime. It's not really a place where you need to watch your back or have to worry about stealing that much, but he does keep an AirTag in his car just in case, since if someone were to steal the car, he would be able to track it. Now, it was about 12 a.m. We were doing our normal thing of going to our local 24-hour CVS at ungodly hours of the night. Tonight we weren't too bad. I wouldn't say that I feel 100% safe at the CVS. It's not exactly a shady or bad area, just sometimes there are one or two people that you're like, whoa, the weirdos are really out tonight, huh? One time there was a dude yo-yoing across the street almost the entire time we were there, but that's another story for another day. So CVS got some weird vibes after 12 a.m., but not car stealing vibes. We were chatting like we normally do. I can't really remember the conversation, but my boyfriend opens his car door as we're still talking, and I don't open mine for some reason. I noticed a car stop diagonally from my boyfriend on his side. My intuition says something's up, but then I see a truck backing out right in front of us. I feel slight relief for a second. The car's just waiting for the truck to back out, right? The truck leaves and the other car stays in its spot in the middle of the parking lot. The dude opens his door and is just standing there. I start getting a little nervous at this point. I just had a bad gut feeling. Some context, I can be a very paranoid person because growing up my mom was the most overprotective type that always thought I was going to be kidnapped when I didn't answer my phone. At this point, I can tell that my boyfriend is also slightly weirded out, and he starts to close his door. Before he can fully do that though, the man starts yapping. He greets my boyfriend and the car dude's yapping, saying he does raps like they always do. The guy starts scribbling down crap on a post-it note. We're sitting there for a good minute just confused and exchanging glances at each other. We're both just looking at each other like, what the hell's this dude on? My boyfriend then closes his door because we're both very weirded out at this point. He eventually comes closer to hand my boyfriend the paper. My boyfriend opens his door just a crack and takes it. While he hands it to him, he ends up dropping some trash as well. The only thing that I can specifically remember was that he dropped a backwood wrapper. Dude runs over to his car, then does a U-turn in the parking lot, whipping the hell out of his little 4-door Toyota. We both just stared at each other, agreeing that that was really strange. The post-it note had his name, number, email, and Instagram. We look up his Instagram, which is private. Really odd. I had a sense that something was wrong, but nothing actually ended up happening. Either the guy was just socially inept because he was high as balls, or we think he was trying to steal my boyfriend's car. We think that he was at least debating it. I think it's possible that he didn't see me in the car, and as he approached, he realized it would be way too hard to take the two of us. Not that I'm threatening at all, but two is better than one. What person in their right mind goes up to someone at almost 1 a.m. in a CVS parking lot telling them that they do raps? My boyfriend also thinks that he thought that maybe it would be easy because my boyfriend had his door open, and that is what maybe attracted him in the first place. The whole thing just doesn't sit right with me at all, but I feel like as a woman, I'm always cautious of stuff like that. Typing this all out, I feel like maybe we overreacted, but I still stand by my feeling that something was off. A few years ago, when I was 20 years old, I went to the CVS pharmacy to get some medicine for my sick boyfriend, who's now my husband. While I'm there, I had browsed some of the other aisles very briefly. As I'm looking at some ramen noodles and cookies, I see a very tall man who looked to be about 6'4". He appeared to be in his 50s, and he was a very disheveled looking fellow. I live in the suburbs where the sight of homeless people is really rare. Yet this guy looked as if he hadn't taken a bath in a month. His clothing stained with who knows what, his hair shaggy and in a grease-matted state. He stops me, smiles, looming over me, standing way too close for comfort, and he then asks me for the time. I'm 5'3" and only 110 pounds, so this guy had definitely intimidated me. Even though I felt something was off about this guy, I really try to treat everyone I come into contact with well. Not to mention, I used to be part of an intense hippie crowd, so eccentric unbathed people weren't too much of a stretch for me. I just smile at this man politely, and then tell him the time on my phone, and I then go back to my business browsing, figuring that just because this guy was looking at me and acting a little off, I shouldn't be so paranoid, as well as kind of ashamed of myself to be too quick to judge. I continue for a few minutes browsing the aisles, and I can see this man staring at me over the aisles, just smiling. I tried to pretend that I didn't notice him and just kept him in my peripheral vision. Finally, I think just being in the same building as him was giving my nerves quite a shock, because no matter where I went, I felt like he was staring at me. I wrap things up and go to the cashier, and she asked for my CVS card. Crap, I forgot it at home. No worries, I can just pull it up using my phone number. I remember being hesitant because at the time the man was now directly behind me in line. But again, I just shamed myself for being paranoid and judgmental, and I went ahead and gave the cashier my phone number. As soon as I gave it to her, right there in that very line, my phone started to ring. My mind immediately went, holy crap. Paranoia speaking right to me. But I push it down again and just tell myself, oh please, way too stereotypical. Don't be so judgmental. It's probably just your mom calling. I scramble to get my phone out of my purse, but as soon as I get it out, the ringing stops. The number is one that I don't recognize. Another red flag. But again, I think, oh, okay, just a solicitor, a wrong number. Surely not anything out of the ordinary. I pay for my things and go out to my car. It's broad daylight, and as soon as I get in my car right there in the parking lot, I get another call. Hello? The caller is an older man's voice, and he sounds very familiar, like 5 minutes ago familiar. All he says is, "Hey there, it's me." And then he giggles, like literally giggles like a child. At this point, I'm 99% sure it's the same man who asked me for the time in the store, but I hold on to my denial and just think, no way, there's no freaking way it's the same guy. This is just too stupid to be real. I then ask the man, who's me? He stupidly told me his name. I forgot it this time. Matt, Mark, Mike? I very hopefully think, oh, it wasn't really that creepy guy in the store. It's just some guy who probably called the wrong number. He probably thinks he called a friend of his, cut him a break. So I tell the man, I'm sorry sir, I think you have the wrong number. And I hang up and then drive back to my boyfriend's and go about my business. Then I start getting calls a few times a day, now from private numbers. I ignore them out of my paranoia and just try to convince myself that they're solicitors or something. I finally pick up the phone. Hello? Who is this? The man on the phone.
Hi again. It's me.
This went on for about a week. I kept thinking that this was just some sick joke or something and just tried to ignore it. Every once in a while I would answer just in case it wasn't him, but it always was. He would just say,
It's me.
over and over and then giggle. I finally got fed up with feeling like a helpless victim, and I called the police to ask for advice, as well as how to de-escalate this whole situation and just make a report of it from what I knew, just in case things were to get out of hand. The man ended up calling back, of course, and I basically told him off. I made a note to remember his name, and I called him by it, and I said basically that he needs to back off, that this is entirely the wrong way of gaining attention. I flat out told him that he's being creepy, the reasons why he's being creepy, and that I've also informed the police, that if he continues to harass me or contact me in any way, I'll pursue further action. He went silent for a few seconds, then just said,
Oh, okay.
and then hung up. Thankfully, I never heard from him again. Here's what I learned from this. Number 1, Don't ever say your phone number out loud in public or any personal information for that matter. 2. If someone gives you a creepy vibe, try to push away your niceness and meekness and act faster and swifter in your best interest. And number 3, I think creepy people target me because of my polite naivety and that I look much younger than I am. Try to look strong and confident, even if you aren't on the inside. Having the gall to defend yourself seems to scare the creepers right back into their holes. As embarrassing as it is, I've been having major issues with going to the bathroom. So before going to get food, my boyfriend and I stopped at CVS to get an enema. I was honestly super embarrassed about buying one and just wanted to get it over with. So I walk up to the register, and as I'm waiting in line, this guy walks up to the left of me and gets way too close to me. He was seriously in my space. The guy was about my height, 5'5", and he was wearing loose clothing with a huge jacket that seemed to encompass him. His hair was dark and seemed to be sticking up everywhere. He also had a beard that was just as messy as his hair. His eyes were huge and bloodshot, and his pupils dominated them. His eyes were practically black, and he had these wild looks in his eyes that I can't quite explain. He seemed nervous and a bit off, shuffling with his jacket and then putting his hands in his jacket as he shuffled closer to me with this unnerving smile on his face. He pointed at the box in my hand and then said, "What's that?" I paused and looked at him with wide eyes, not knowing how to react. I looked back ahead of me and just tried to ignore him. He took another step toward me, and I could feel his breath hitting my cheek. He asked what it was once again, and then said, "Fleet," which is the brand of enema. Seriously? I just want to get through this in peace, and this guy's advertising to the world what I'm buying. My boyfriend noticed the guy after he came back from looking at some magazines, and then pushed me gently ahead of him, then put himself in between the weird dude and myself. He placed his hands on my shoulders and leaned forward to kiss me on the cheek. The guy's mood totally changed, and he took his hand back out of his jacket, then went quiet for a few moments. It was finally my turn at the register, so I handed the lady my item, and the guy walked to the other side of me, then pointed to these bottled Starbucks drinks on the counter that the people before me had decided they didn't want and left there on the counter. He then pointed at those and then said, "My mother used to like these, until people killed her." The lady at the register and I just kind of looked at each other and really didn't know how to react. My boyfriend just awkwardly said, "Damn, that sucks, man." The scanner finally registered my item, and as I was paying, the weird guy just started laughing. He kept laughing and got louder and louder as my boyfriend and I left the store. I had this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach, and my heart was beating so rapidly inside my chest. We walked very quickly away from the store, laughing nervously, but I could still hear his maniacal laughter in the back of my head. My boyfriend and I laugh about this now, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had been there alone. And if my boyfriend wasn't protective enough before, he definitely is even more now. This happened in the early spring of 2006. I was 20 years old and in my sophomore year at college. I lived with a few roommates in an apartment close to campus. As is typically the case, many businesses that might be relevant to students line the campus on all sides, including a CVS pharmacy. One morning, I had to run to CVS to get a few things before class. I was wearing a hoodie, sweatpants, and a hat, so nothing at all that would say, "Look at me." I just wanted to get in and out and get to class. I pulled into the parking lot and parked, and I had noticed a car pulling in behind me who parked 2 spots over from me. The lot was pretty empty, with maybe 2 other cars in the lot on the other end, likely belonging to the employees. There was a good song on the radio that I really wanted to hear, so I sat in my car for a minute while it finished. I got that feeling that someone was watching me, and I looked over at the car to see an older man with gray hair just staring at me. It really creeped me out, so I decided to wait another minute before getting out of my car. I was hoping he'd either get out of his car or leave. He didn't budge, so I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, because a part of me thought that maybe I was just being paranoid and silly. Nobody gets kidnapped in broad daylight in a busy area. I mean, right? Oh, sweet naive summer child. I didn't want to be late for class, so I decided to just get out of my car and speed walk into the store, hoping I would reach the safety of CVS before Mr. Creepy could so much as blink. I walked in and went to an aisle of Easter items that happened to be close to the register. About 3 seconds after I got into the store, he came quickly walking in, which seemed to have been impossible for a heavy-set man in his late 40s or early 50s. He must have practically jumped out of his car and sprinted after me. He walked directly in the aisle I was in and then stood next to me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only actually 30 seconds. He then continued down the rest of the aisle and around a corner to another one. I was overwhelmed with a very creepy feeling, so I stayed in that aisle. There wasn't an employee standing at the register, but I hoped that there would be a security camera nearby and maybe someone would come up to the counter. I was hoping Mr. Creepy would just get what he came for and leave, but instead he kept walking by my aisle and glancing at me, waiting about a minute and then walking by yet again. This happened probably 5 times. I should have told someone on staff that I felt unsafe, but I didn't. My flight instincts had kicked in, and all I could think to do was leave. I decided to make a run for it after he walked by me, and when he did it again, I very briskly walked out the door. I had found my keys and had my thumb on the unlock button, so as soon as I was out of the door, I then ran the 20 feet to my car. I jumped in, locked the door, and turned on my car as fast as I could. My hand was shaking as I put in the key and turned it. I put the car in gear and drove towards the entrance just in time to see Mr. Creepy walking out of the store empty-handed and looking right at me. He ran and jumped into his car, but I made a turn and got out of his sight. I was shaking so badly and had this huge feeling that I had escaped some terrible fate. I at least had the presence of mind to make a quick U-turn and get out of sight, and I drove around for 10 minutes just to make sure I wasn't being followed. It took me about 6 months before I went back to that CVS again. Looking back, I really wish that I had called and reported his general description and car to the police, but I just didn't think of it at the time. So to give some context, I'm a small-statured girl, like 5'1". I guess that makes me look easily preyed on. I don't know. One night around 9:30, I realized that I had no more pads and I needed to go get some. Walgreens closed at 10 and wasn't that far, so I headed there. The Walgreens I headed to wasn't in the best area. It was in one of those neighborhoods that wasn't too safe, but surrounded by safe neighborhoods, so it wasn't terrible either. I parked my car directly behind the door so I can see it from the entrance. There's spots in front of me that are closer to the door but are in the darkness. I would rather walk a little further than be hidden in the darkness. I was the only car in the parking lot, and I'm FaceTiming with a friend. I start walking towards the doors and I realize my car may still be on. It's a push-to-start car. Sometimes I forget to turn it off, but I always lock it regardless. So I turn around to go check, and it's not on. As I lock my car door to start walking away, a car comes pulling in super quickly, and I feel a little uneasy. I'm really paranoid by nature, and I just hurry up and walk inside. As I go inside, my friend has to go. I make my way to the aisle, and I can't seem to find the pads at all. I'm in the adult diaper area and trying to find the pads. I have that feeling that someone's following me, as I then hear footsteps and just feel weird. There's only me and the employee in the store, so maybe they think I'm stealing as it's about to close. This kind of pisses me off, but whatever, do your job. I keep looking at the pads, and as I turn a corner, I notice whoever's following me keeps ducking off into an aisle. As I turn the next aisle, this person wasn't fast enough and I saw them. It wasn't an employee. It was a 5'4" to 5'5" older man, maybe late 40s, early 50s. He had frosted tips and he looked like he was trying to look younger, but he just looked like a sketchy guy instead. Awkward. I felt weird, but whatever. I always think that my paranoia is just overthinking. I get my pads and go to the register. I kid you not when I tell you this, but this man runs to the register and is empty-handed. If you've been in this store as long as me for 15 minutes and you have nothing, that's just weird. He then grabs some sodas from the register fridge. I check out and I walk to the side of the store right by the coolers in the photo area. This way I can see the register and the door, but they can't see me. I call my boyfriend and tell him what happened and to come. This man takes forever to check out his 2 soda bottles. Then he exits. I tell the employee what's going on. She looks outside and he's parked on the driver's side of my car, and he drives a black older van model. She said that he was acting really weird and antsy, and when I walked away he had asked where I went. She let me stay there until he left, which took 7 minutes. My boyfriend arrived shortly after the man left. I told him the description of the car, and he told me as he pulled in he saw that car circling the building a few times, then hiding in the darkness back parking lot. The one for employees and pharmacy drive-thru, which you can see the exit. Yikes. I haven't returned to that same location since. This happened a few years back when I was 18 and starting a new job at a restaurant in my town. My town is very small. It's all residential except for one long main street where all the shops and restaurants are located. I took a job at an Italian restaurant to make some extra money before leaving for college. I was training to be a waitress, so my first couple of weeks I was mostly in the kitchen learning the dishes and being a runner. Everyone who worked in the kitchen were older men who were pretty laser focused on their tasks, so they didn't really talk to me, except for one of the cooks who paid a little too much attention to me. His name was Red. That wasn't his real name, but everyone called him Red, so I went along with it. Red was in his early 40s and dating one of the waitresses that was training me. Whenever his girlfriend wasn't around, he would always stand a little too close to me and would make comments about how pretty I am and how I should show more skin. He even went as far as to buy me a tight, low-cut black shirt that he thought was perfect because it matched the uniform. The waitress uniform was just black slacks and a black polo. Being from a small town and not being exposed to creeps, I just said thanks, took the shirt, and threw it into one of those donation bins on my way home. The creepiness went on for months. Him always telling me how my face was too sexy to be on that body. He constantly told me that I had the body of a 12-year-old boy because I have small breasts. He would even follow me around in the restaurant. Once I went to the women's room, and when I walked out, he was standing outside waiting for me. He told me he got lost on the way to the men's room, even though it was on the complete opposite side of the restaurant. When I told him that, he had asked me to escort him there so we could spend some time together. I told the manager, but the manager was Red's uncle, so he brushed off my complaints. Many of the other waitresses told me that's just how Red is and to just ignore him. I really tried my best, but every time he was around, I would feel a million danger bells going off in my head. About a week before I was supposed to leave for college, I then resigned from the restaurant. It was the end of my last shift around 9 p.m., and I was going around saying goodbye to everyone. I hadn't seen Red, and I took that as a win because I didn't want to deal with him at all. I walked alone out of the restaurant into the dimly lit parking lot. I saw Red's minivan parked kind of in the shadows. I only noticed it because I could see the light from his cigarette. I did kind of a half wave toward him, figuring that was enough of a goodbye. I then got out of my car and started to drive out of the parking lot. I noticed that as soon as I started my car, Red started his. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road in the town. When I looked in my rearview mirror, I could see his car right behind mine. I thought I was overreacting. Like, there's no way this grown man would be following me, right? Well, I was so wrong. I decided to test my theory and pull into the Walgreens pharmacy parking lot. I didn't see his car enter the lot. I sighed in relief and then went into the store to pick up a few things. When I walked down toward my car, my heart stopped. Red was parked right next to me on the driver's side. He was standing in front of my driver's side door. I tried to stay calm and say hello. He asked me why I didn't say goodbye to him and how it hurt his feelings. He said the only way he could forgive me is if I hugged him. Against my better judgment, I said okay and then reluctantly stepped forward. I limply put my arms around him, but he yanked me into a strong bear hug and was squeezing me so hard I had started to have trouble breathing. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. With my free hand, I then pinched his side as hard as I could so he would let go. When he did, I was able to throw my door open and then jump in. I locked the doors immediately. He started banging on my window and trying to open the handle of my car. I shoved the keys in the ignition and peeled out of the lot. He pretty much did the same, and I could see he was following me. The good part about living in a small town is that the police station isn't very far. I drove right there, and as soon as I pulled into the police station parking lot, Red just kept driving. I filed a report against him. I was informed that it wasn't the first time a report like this had been filed against him, and that they would look into it. About a month after that, I was already in school in a different state. I actually got a text from one of my old coworkers saying that Red had a total breakdown and locked himself in the manager's office and totally trashed it. He was arrested and then finally fired. I worked at a pharmacy for a few years and met some incredibly odd people. Some were harmless, such as the old lady who would talk your ear off about owls until you could manage to escape. Others, however, were not as innocent in their weirdness. Once I was ringing up first aid supplies for a customer who I noticed had a greenish tint to his skin, and actually put me in the mind of Frankenstein's monster because of his size and build and just his odd look. As I was handing him his change, he asked, "Do you wonder why my skin is green?" I politely told him that the thought had actually crossed my mind. So he began to tell me that he had a certain disease that I had never heard of, and I can't even remember what he called it now. Then he asked me if I knew how he got that disease, to which I replied no. He then said, "By having sex with dogs. I have sex with dogs." Then he grabbed his bag of supplies and walked out like it was just a normal thing to say. Another strange person was our mailman. I'm a friendly, talkative kind of girl. I try to make everyone feel important and appreciated. Well, apparently the mailman we had mistook that as my being flirtatious with him. I noticed that he started spending more and more time in the pharmacy chit-chatting with me whenever he'd deliver our mail. I didn't really think anything creepy of it though. One day my husband had just sent me roses just for no reason. The mailman came in and saw them, and he asked me who they were from. I told him that my husband had sent them. He asked if my husband was good to me and if I loved him. I told him he was the greatest husband ever, and that I didn't know what I'd do without him, and that I loved him dearly. He then wanted to know how long we'd been married. I told him. He wanted to know where my husband worked. I told him. Then he started to ask in more detail about my husband's job. Wanted to know if he ever worked nights or out of town, what time he left and got home, etc. After a while, I started to be more vague with my answers, and then he finally left. I told my husband about our slightly odd conversation when I got home that evening. He immediately told me that the guy sounded way too into me, and he thought maybe he was wanting to see if I was ever home alone so he could come over or something. I brushed it off. After all, it was just a nice middle-aged mailman. The next week, I walked about 2 blocks down to a fast food restaurant for lunch. As I'm sitting by a window, all of a sudden there he is waving and smiling in the window at me. So I waved back in a completely uninterested way. The next thing I knew, he came into the restaurant and actually sat down at my table. He said he was looking for me and that he was so glad that he found me. I really didn't know what to say, so I just told him I only had about a minute before I had to get back to work and excuse myself. For the next few weeks, it seemed like every time I turned around, he would be there, even when I wasn't working. It was really starting to get annoying and even a little scary. Then just as quickly as it started, he just stopped. He would come in, drop off the mail without even saying a word, and I was fine with that. One of the creepiest repeat customers we had was an overweight guy in his 50s. His pale white skin and blondish white hair always looked oily, and his teeth were big, pointy, and very yellow. He was a creep and a half, always hugging every younger female that he could corner. And they weren't friendly little hugs either. It was full body, fill you up and make you feel violated and nasty kind of hugs. It didn't matter how much you resisted or told him no, he forced it. My coworkers would warn me and the other young girl that I worked with if they saw him coming so we could get behind the counter where he couldn't reach us. He totally made my skin crawl. I could go on and on. There were just so many creepers I met while working there. It was about November 2012 in Houston, Texas. I was taking night classes to become a medical assistant. Trade school and only 8 months of school. Monday through Thursday nights, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I was driving. I had just left school at about 10:15 and had some homework that I had questions over. Blah, blah, blah. I had to stop at Walgreens for an RX. There's really only one 24-hour Walgreens near my home, and it's right down the street from my school. I'm wearing royal blue scrubs, my student ID, and I'm tired. Getting my RX in the back of the store, I'm not really paying attention to my surroundings. But then someone caught my eye. It was this guy. He kind of stood at the end of each aisle I was on, but I thought he was just there doing the same thing I was. Anyway, I headed up to the register because I had a few other items I had gotten, not just the RX, and I realized this guy had walked right past me and was standing outside near the trash cans at the entrance. As I'm walking to my car, I see him pick up his phone and he's watching me. Like hardcore, just staring. I can kind of read lips, and he was describing my appearance, my car, my build, all of that to someone on the phone. So I get in my car, start it, and he does the same. Now it's worth noting that this Walgreens is 2 blocks away from the courthouse and the sheriff's office. I drive straight there once I get my crap together in my car. This guy followed me in his vehicle before realizing where I'm really going. The courthouse and sheriff's office is kind of in a crappy neighborhood, or at least on the edge of it. I then park, run inside, ask to speak to an on-duty officer, and explain what had happened and what was happening. He takes a statement from me. I describe the man in almost perfect detail, and he offers me an escort home. We drive home, him a few car lengths behind me, and we make it there with no hiccups or no reappearance of the guy in his crappy Toyota Corolla. I park in my driveway and he circles around my cul-de-sac, and when he gets back to my house, calls me over to the patrol car. He has his laptop up with the guy's mugshot and record right there. He asks if it's him. I nod and say yeah. What he told me next, still to this day, absolutely freaks me out. As we were driving to my house, the other sheriffs in the area found him, then pulled him over. They searched the car and found a young girl about my age, 19 at the time, in his trunk. He was known in the area for pimping, and he was trying to get me as a possible prostitute of his. I'm not going to go into too many details because duh, but at the time I lived in a very well suburb of Houston. This kind of thing does not happen there, or should I say the news doesn't report it happening there. But I'm very fortunate that nothing bad happened to me. And I want to give a big thank you to those officers. For general context, I'm an 18-year-old female living along the mid-Atlantic coast of the United States. The incident occurred during this past summer when I was working at my job at a local pharmacy. I had worked this job for a little over 2 years at that point, needing to make ends meet in order to pay for gas and other necessities throughout my high school years. My coworkers had always treated me like a little sister since I was the youngest employee on the team, and it's something that I've always appreciated during my time working there. When I first started working for the store, I was a typical awkward high school girl, with very little to no experience working in customer service, let alone talking to complete strangers day in and day out. However, over the years, I had grown much more outgoing and demonstrated a rather bubbly attitude towards people, comfortable with the idea of helping complete strangers with a rather positive attitude. I live by the motto, treat others the way you want to be treated, while on my shifts, and usually have no backlash with that kind of work ethic. I suppose you could say I let my guard down a bit with this demeanor a bit, and after the experience I had while working at the store, I've become much more reserved and less outward with my introductions to people. The town where I live is notorious for its bad reputation with drugs. The heroin epidemic in the area has spiked significantly over the past 20 years due to a variety of causes. It's not unheard of for stores around where I work to have stories of people ODing in their parking lots or bathrooms, and even my store had some strange characters come in. People obviously strung out on drugs with slurred speech patterns and erratic behavior were somewhat of a common occurrence. My coworkers and I learned to get used to them coming in, and since I was the #1 counter girl to ring them up for whatever the cheap cigarettes they needed to buy, or whatever the case, I became accustomed to their behavior. They usually came in during the late evening hours when I worked, and usually there were other coworkers or managers on the floor, so I didn't ever feel completely isolated with these druggies. I should also point out that I'm only about 5'2" with blonde hair, and without sounding too obnoxious, a rather good-looking girl. I would get some comments here and there about my appearance, and I would politely thank them, as it wasn't usually anything too straightforward or gross in the least bit. However, there were a few occasions where I would get some crude comments about my body, or all the other things the particular person would like to do to me. I usually just laughed it off awkwardly, as I was never too sure of what to do or say in those situations without the risk of losing my well-loved job. There were also a few times when I would notice a man following me in the store. It was never obvious enough to scare me. Usually when I would be stocking shelves, I had noticed a guy standing a bit too long in the aisles reading labels of vitamins that I know shouldn't be that interesting. None of that prepared me for what was about to come. This particular event occurred one later afternoon during the summer. It was around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and we had just received our shipment of food to unload for the following week. I grabbed one of my carts and started gathering some of the candy from one of the many totes of food that we received and began doing my job. I noticed a man walk down into my aisle and start to aimlessly look at all the candy. He was black, about 5'10" and semi-stocky in build with a red t-shirt on and some gym shorts. I'd say his age range was somewhere in his mid to late 20s. I asked him kindly with my overly polite customer voice, "Do you need help with anything, sir?" He looked over at me and gave me a smile, but something about it I knew was off. I can't pinpoint it to this day, but it was something that made me put myself a bit more on guard just by the look he gave me alone. No, not right now," the man replied, before seemingly looking back at the candy and just staring at it like it was going to move or something. I went back to work, stocking up on the candy on the higher shelves and minding my own business. This went on for about another 10 minutes or so, and the man was still in the aisle with me. At that point, I was starting to get a bit creeped out. One guy stands in a candy aisle and just stares at the candy for that long. I decided to put things to the test. I walked away from my candy for a bit and went to the back room to organize some shelves before heading out to the main floor again, but this time in another aisle with different items to unload. As predicted, he found me in the aisle once more and stood in the aisle randomly picking up items and setting them back down again like he was reading them. Finally, after about 5 or so minutes of awkward silence, he chimed up. "Hey, do you actually mind coming over here for a second? I have a question about one of the sales." I looked over at him. His face relaxed from that creepy grin, but that feeling of worry still creeped throughout my whole body. Despite this, I replied back, yeah, sure. What's your question? I walked over towards him, myself facing the shelf on the aisle, analyzing the tag to see what his problem might be. The man stood about a foot away from me, sideways so he was facing me. Yeah, I was, wondering, when did this sale end? He asked, a voice a little shaky. I kept my gaze away from him, not wanting to look him in the eye. The question was rather stupid to say the least, as it stated on the sales tag on the bottom right corner when the sale ended. It ends on the 21st, I replied, a little curtly, trying not to sound impatient, when I noticed out of the corner of my eye a slight repetitive movement coming from the man. I couldn't be sure what it was, but I quickly scurried away as the man just gave me total creeper vibes. That was the moment that I started getting scared. I went into the bathroom a second time and hid in the bathroom for about 10 minutes or so. Did I really see what I thought I saw? No way. It could have been anything. I wasn't even looking at him. It was simply a quick glance that could no way confirm what horrific thing I thought I noticed. Calming myself down a bit, I had splashed some cold water on my face and went back to the candy aisle I had previously been working in. I went back to stocking the shelves with the man nowhere in sight. I let out a sigh of relief and nearly pushed him out of my mind when I turned around in the aisle, some bags of Smarties in the cart right behind me, and we were both standing there to the right of the cart. My heart dropped, but I proceeded to keep my gaze lowered while I organized some more bags of candy when I turned my gaze towards him, noticing the repetitive movement yet again, and I almost let out a scream. His body was positioned the same as before when he asked me about the sales tag earlier, his one shoulder pressed against the shelf of the aisle and his body facing me. I kid you not. He had his penis out of the gym shorts and fully stroking himself in the middle of the store, not 1 foot away from me. I stood there in shock for a brief second before darting into the next aisle over where conveniently my manager was. I grabbed her and pulled her into the back room, nearly crying and stumbling on the words that I was saying. Now, something you need to know about this manager is that she's a complete spitfire. She's in her late 50s and is smaller than me, but has the attitude and hothead nature of a bull. So when I told her that this strange man decided it would be a good idea to show his affections towards me by jerking off in front of me, her face went bright red and took off out the back room. Now, instead of arguing and chasing after him like she wanted, she instead went out into the parking lot to identify his tag number on his license if he got into a vehicle. Sadly, by the time she went out of the store, the man had took off on foot across the highway that ran by our store. I just sat there shaking and in shock in the office over that. The cops were called and we filed a report on the man, and we also pulled the surveillance tapes. The day following, we got a call from the state police that a man was arrested doing the same exact thing to another female employee in town about 20 minutes away, and he was arrested. I'm not entirely sure what happened after that, as I got mixed reports from the police that he fled to another state, and another report saying he was arrested once more for an indecency charge. To this day, I still haven't really gotten over that. If any lesson was to come for this, even working in customer service where you need to have a smile and chipper attitude, always keep a guard up, because you never know who could abuse that.